Hello, and welcome to episode 50 of the Sci-Fi Podcast. From Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Nick Zoutra. Well, folks, before I go ahead and introduce our guest, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for the love and support that you've shown over the past 2 years for this podcast. Doing 50 interviews with 50 different philosophers of science from all walks of life has been an incredible honor, an incredible privilege, and it's something that I've greatly enjoyed. And it couldn't be possible if it wasn't for the encouragement and affirmation that you, the listener, and the supporter have provided over these past years. So for that, for the writing into the show, for the likes, for the subscriptions, for the ratings on iTunes, encouragement of speakers, it allowed me to continue to look out for folks of interest, to continue to ask interesting questions, and to make this program really something special. So for that, I just wanted to say I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you. Thank you very, very much. Some news in terms of philosophy of science in general. The Philosophy of Science Association meeting just happened about 2 weeks ago in Seattle, Washington. I happened to attend. A number of other philosophers happened to attend. If I saw you there, it was a really great pleasure meeting you, and hello again. But that conference was great. One of the cool things about it is they now have a poster session, and I happened to present a poster called "What is the Greatest Challenge Facing Philosophers of Science Today, According to Philosophers of Science?" And the poster was basically results from these interviews, and specifically on the question of the greatest challenge. I did a bit of qualitative research to understand and analyze that, and presented the findings at the conference. If you'd like to learn a bit more about that project, there's a write-up on the Daily News in terms of the greatest challenge facing philosophy of science. I think that's really great. It actually has a picture of the poster. And if you're not already following Twitter at Sci-Fi Pod, you can definitely find some links to a little bit more about that project and its results. And once again, for those who I did meet at the conference and for those who have provided their support for that particular project, thank you very, very much. It was very encouraging, and I only hope to continue and do so with more social science research about our discipline in the future. Something also to be looking forward to is that I've spoken with a couple folks about some additional kinds of interviews with philosophers of science and scientists. So combining the two, bringing them onto the same stage, and perhaps what would be great about that is not only getting to learn of the origin stories and the way in which philosophers of science do their work and interact with scientists, but actually getting to understand and really see the dynamic between the pairs or the groups of individuals working together. So whether that's going to happen between myself and another researcher, or that might just be happening with another researcher, I just wanted to, as a general announcement for the field and those who might be interested in that. Please, stay tuned and look out for this particular program, which I think you'll hopefully find very interesting. Well, okay, I think that's pretty much all it for the news. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest for the 50th episode. I am thrilled to have this guest. It was an incredible time chatting with him. Our guest is Dr. Justin Garson, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Hunter College-CUNY. So Justin's main interest is thinking about how biology can help us make progress on traditional problems of human nature, such as, what does evolutionary biology tell us about altruism? What do molecular biology and developmental biology tell us about nature and nurture? How do meaning and representation originate in the brain? What are mental disorders, and how do they stem from brain dysfunctions? Justin's first book, The Biological Mind, A Philosophical Introduction, looks at problems like altruism, evolutionary psychology, nature and nurture, free will, and the origin of meaning and mental illness. His second book, A Critical Overview of Biological Functions, surveys the controversial biological functions debate. His most recent book, What Biological Functions Are and Why They Matter, he presents and defends a new theory of functions. Justin also writes on the history of science, with an emphasis on neuroscience and psychiatry. His view is that it's hard to understand how scientists use certain concepts today, like the concept of biological information, but without understanding why they began using them in the first place. He's written on social and historical aspects of the concept of information in neuroscience, and he recently wrote a book chapter on the dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia. He is currently in the early stages of writing a book on the history and philosophy of American psychiatry in the 20th century called Madness as a Dysfunction and as a Strategy. So Justin and I had a wonderful chat. I'm really interested in his work and what he does. I think if you listen to the interview, he gets to, he talks a little bit about, we talk about the PSA and his experience at that a couple of weeks ago. We talk a lot about just his general overall approach to doing philosophy of science and philosophy of biology in particular, as well as his interest in the history of science. So I think there's a lot here in this interview. I hope you'll stick around and I hope you'll enjoy it. So without further ado, let's bring in Justin. Dr. Justin Garson, welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. How are you this Thursday morning?
I'm great. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks so much for taking the time. Where are you calling us from?
Well, I'm in New York now, at my home in Queens. I go into work about 3 days a week, so this is one of my days when I get to stay at home and do my research and teaching preparation and all that fun stuff.
Nice. Are you in favor of the home office?
Oh, I love it. Oh,
yeah.
Are you kidding? Yeah, I love it. Well, particularly when you think about the, taking the subway and the bus in New York, it's kind of a stressful experience in its own right. So getting to avoid hour and a half commute is a nice benefit of staying home.
Yeah, I bet. How are you feeling about the new news with the Amazon headquarters coming in?
It's I don't know what to think of it yet. Some people are worried that it's going to destroy the neighborhood, and other people are excited for the new opportunities that they envision. So I'm just going to kind of wait it out and see how it goes. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's I'm not looking forward to another 10 or 20,000 people fighting another 10 or 20,000 people to get into the city and back. Yeah, but maybe there will be some good in it.
Cool. So, did you happen to go to the PSA this year, the philosophy session? Well, that's great. Before we jump in, how was your experience at the 2018 Philosophy of Science Association conference?
Oh, I love it. I love the PSA. I love the History of Science Society, too. I'm kind of disappointed that PSA and HSS have decided to go their own ways. Yeah. But I love PSA. I love getting to see some of my old friends there. I love getting to meet new people. So yeah, it's terrific. I love it. Yeah, I love it. It's my favorite conference by far.
Great. Did you happen to present any papers or a poster?
I did. I gave a paper on my favorite topic, which is biological functions, and I argued that all of my opponents about functions are wrong. And they should stop presenting their false and backwards views on functions.
Absolutely.
No, well, I kind of did, but I'm kind of joking too. But no, I gave a paper on biological functions, just developing my point of view on it.
Okay. And is this paper kind of a further illustration or argument that comes out of the book, or is this sort of
no? So it was kind of a side thing to the book. So I just finished this book, What Biological Functions Are and Why They Matter. That's going to be coming out pretty soon. But you may know about this, but theories of biological function are usually divided up into the historical ones and the ahistorical ones. So a historical theory of function is the selected effects theory. It says that a trait's function is just whatever was selected for. And an ahistorical theory is something like Christopher Bors's theory, which says that a function of a trait is its present day contribution to the organism's fitness. So there's been this long-running dispute between the proponents of the historical theories like me and the proponents of the ahistorical theories. So I gave a paper called There Are No Ahistorical Theories of Function. And I love the simple, short titles like that. Simple, short, punchy. But I argue that all of these mainstream ahistorical theories actually tacitly invoke history. And you just have to dig around a little bit and you'll find that the proponents of these theories are themselves referring to history. That doesn't mean their theories are wrong. Their theories might stand perfectly well on their own, but it does mean that we shouldn't divide theories up into the historical ones and the ahistorical ones. They're all historical. But it was interesting because I had written the book, and this was very much just a side thing. It was a paper that I had always kind of meant to write up and never had an opportunity to. And so this PSA was a good chance to.
Oh, fantastic. And yeah, that was my next question is, as a result of we shouldn't see them as either ahistorical or historical, what do you take to be the main consequence then of that conclusion?
Well, a couple. So one, I think that they're all historical theories. And so I think there are better ways of dividing up theories of function than into historical and ahistorical. Well, there are a few consequences. I mean, one is just for classification, we need a different way of dividing up theories of function. I prefer to divide them up in terms of etiological and non-etiological, where an etiological theory of function, the idea is that when a biologist attributes a function to a trait, say the function of the heart is to pump blood, in part they're trying to explain why people have hearts. And that's the basic intuition behind the etiological theory, that function statements play this crucial role as causal explanations. So I say, look, there are etiological theories. There are non-etiological theories. In other words, people who think that function statements are not, or they're not primarily intended as causal explanations. But everybody's theory is a historical one. And then a second consequence is just that one of the main motivations for these ahistorical theories is that the proponents of these theories believe that a good theory of function should be ahistorical. It shouldn't refer to history. When a biologist attributes functions to traits, they think those biologists aren't invoking history, they're not referring to history, they're not citing history, and so they're trying to respect what they see as this basic feature of biological usage. But my point is that, well, if it turns out that there are ahistorical theories of function, then we really need to rethink what exactly is the motivation for continuing to accept these theories if they don't actually do what they claim to do.
Very good points. Did you see any other great papers or any other stories from the PSA that you can recall that made this one particularly special?
Sure. The thing I liked the most, I moderated, Daniel Dennett was here at the PSA this year, and he doesn't usually come. And he was co-organizing a symposium called Reconsidering the Meme's Eye Point of View. And he was giving a pitch to the philosophers of science and the philosophers of biology why they should take this idea of memes seriously, why they shouldn't brush it under the rug or ignore it. And I thought it was a really fascinating perspective. His point of view is that we think about different forms of cultural evolution, and everybody has their pet theory of cultural evolution. But the idea is that what he calls memetics, the study of memes, is really a kind of umbrella theory for thinking about cultural evolution in general. So my sense is that he is saying, among other things, look, if you're a cultural evolutionist, if you think that cultural evolution is an important part of cultural change, which many philosophers of biology do, then you're already committed to something like what he's calling a meme, and so you should take the idea of a meme seriously. So I thought it was interesting. I'm happy to give Dennett's viewpoint on memes a second look. And in fact, he just published a book, From Bacteria to Bach and Back, and he has a couple chapters defending the idea of memes against common criticisms. And I do think it would be good for philosophers of biology to read it think carefully about whether whether there's something here that we missed out on that we should take more seriously than we have.
Yeah. I know. I always consider Dennett working. Well, he does a number of things, but I never see him as philosophers of biology paying so much attention to what he's doing. But this is certainly a reason to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And it was nice to meet him. He's very sweet guy. Just a very interesting person to hang out with.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like you had a good time. Sounds like you had a good paper. Sounds great. Look forward to seeing it coming out in the the proceedings whenever that comes out. I guess this fall or next fall or something like that.
Now, it's up on my website now.
Great.
It's up online, so if anybody wants to read it, it's floating around the internet at this point.
Right.
And I saw that you gave a poster, and it got a nice write-up in the Daily News.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really great. It's just folks like you who have come on and have done have taken the time to discuss their I'd say meta-theoretic or meta-methodological views concerning what are the challenges facing philosophy of science, and turn that into a bit of a qualitative study. And I think if anything, it just helped to start the conversation to think about it, and
Well, it's a very important conversation. I guess we'll come back to this later on, but given the job market for philosophers of science, we have to think seriously about how we're going to position ourselves in relationship to the discipline as a whole. So good job. Very crucial social significance for us philosophers of science.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. Well, let's go ahead and take a step back and do the whole spiel and take a step back from the beginning, Justin. So tell us a little bit about your origin story. Where did you grow up?
That's so cool. I didn't know I had an origin story. No, I grew up in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., Silver Spring, Maryland. So when I moved to New York about 7 years ago to start teaching at Hunter, New York was a little bit bigger than what I was used to, but living in a big East Coast city was a pretty easy transition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What did your parents do growing up?
Well, they both worked in law. My mom was a law librarian, and my dad was a lawyer for the government. So they were both very educated, and there was always this presumption that I would go to college and maybe even graduate school. So that was always in the background of my thinking when I was growing up. And it probably had this impact on me that I always had this idea that I didn't really need to figure out what I wanted to do, because I would probably go through college. I would probably end up in graduate school anyway. So it was a little bit freeing, because when I was in college, I think I had the idea that I would end up in graduate school somehow or another. So I really took my time to just explore the things that I was interested in: literature, and psychology, philosophy, and logic, and science. And I didn't feel the same pressure that I think some people feel to declare your major, get your credits, and get out of here.
Okay. Was there anything in particular, especially in those formative years coming up, that you found it really interesting?
Not really. I mean, boy. It really wasn't. I didn't really develop any strong set of interests in philosophy. Really, actually, until about my senior year of college. That's when I thought, wow, philosophy is really cool. But before that, no, I just was interested in reading widely and just learning about what people had written and thought.
Okay. So there weren't any other thoughts or other ideas of careers or things. It was mostly like, probably going to just kind of learn generally as much as I can.
Yeah, it was like just floating around in academia. exploring various things that were interesting to me. So I went to an interesting school called the Evergreen State College out in Olympia, Washington. And it was perfect for me because this is a school that you don't get grades, and they really emphasize academic freedom. And probably the best thing for me is that you didn't have to declare a major. So I thought, well, this is the school that I want to be at. I can study what I like, and I don't have to tell anybody what I'm majoring in. So that was a perfect fit for me. And let's see, I think they have a trimester system. And for 2 of those trimesters, we studied the works of Carl Jung, the psychologist of all people. And we thought about Carl Jung's relationship to psychology, his relationship to philosophy, his relationship to occultism. So it was a blast. That was the kind of school that I really needed to be at, where I could just focus on these somewhat unconventional topics as I figured out what I wanted to do.
So how does this experience, now that you're an instructor in college, how does this experience at teaching at Hunter and the way things work at Hunter differ from this school in Washington?
Well, I mean, Hunter is in some ways a more conventional college system where by the end of your sophomore year, you're asked to declare your major. And I understand that. I understand that a lot of people don't have the privilege of floating around in college for 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 years. They've got to figure out what they want to do, and they've got to get their degree and get out and get into the world and start bringing in some money. So I understand that, and I respect that. I was very privileged not to have to make those kinds of choices right away. But I really sympathize, because just yesterday I had a student come in, and she was in her sophomore year, and she's going to have to declare a major pretty soon. And she looked at me and said, "How do you figure out what you want to do?" And I said, "That's a damn good question." And best of luck to you. I mean, I wish I could have given her. I wish I could have told her, forget about declaring a major. Just keep taking courses in a variety of fields, and eventually you'll settle on something. But I realized that advice is not. Not everybody can follow that. Not everybody has the privilege of following that advice.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful to recognize that, where you were at the time, and then how that's, circumstantial. Like, it can be great for you, maybe not for everybody, or maybe not at the right time. Maybe there'll be another time in your life when you can kind of take things slowly as you go. And sometimes you have to go forward, and you have to do these kinds of things.
Right. And another thing, I always loved school. I mean, I loved being in school. And I think one reason I ended up as a professor is because it was the only way that I could just stay in a university setting for the rest of my life. Because eventually I was going to get my undergraduate degree. They would kick me out, and then I could go to graduate school. But eventually I would get my PhD, and they would kick me out. So I thought, well,
what are you going to do?
Professor, I can kind of keep doing this forever. But I also realized not everybody loves being in school. What
do you think people don't like about being in school? I mean, from your experience, because I talk to everyone who's on this show pretty much loves school in some way. Like, if they weren't, they probably wouldn't be in the university system. But we meet with plenty of students that do not like school. And I guess we can probably ask them, but if you had to say, what do you think?
I have a little bit of insight here, because my first college was University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I went there for a year and a half. And again, a conventional university. I took five courses per semester, having to take all kinds of courses that I didn't understand, didn't necessarily like. And in a sense, I just felt overwhelmed with the sheer workload. I wasn't that interested in what I was learning about. So I was very fortunate, because I remember there was one week when I wasn't very happy there at UNCG. I didn't know what I was going to do. And this one magical week, 3 different people, independently of one another, mentioned this Evergreen State College. So I thought, well, I better look into Evergreen State College. And that's exactly it. I needed a place where I was given the go-ahead to study what I liked and to really be able to forget about taking 5 courses a semester. Just immerse yourself in something for 3 to 6 months. It could be something weird. It could be Carl Jung and the occult. Just immerse yourself in whatever you're interested in. And I realized that style of education does not work for everybody, and some people need a little bit more structure, a little bit more discipline. But for me, that really changed my perception of academics. That was exactly the right fit that I needed. So, yeah, I was certainly somebody who did not like being in the university when I began, and I was pretty unhappy, and I took some time off after a year and a half. I just needed to find the school that was the right fit for my own intellectual orientation.
Yeah, that's a really good story. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that is really telling of the number of folks that we may all experience too, in terms of our coming to find out what works for us.
Right. And one other thing about Evergreen, which is very cool, is that it is a public state school. So it's not one of these schools that you're shelling out $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 a year. Huh. It was a school where I actually was able to pay my way through by working as working in the food industry, bussing tables and washing dishes, and eventually waiting tables. So I did that while I was in Evergreen. So it's unlike a lot of these alternative schools where they don't give grades and they give you a lot of academic freedom. Evergreen is one of the really special ones in that it is a public state school, so it's a very affordable education as well.
Fantastic.
So here's my pitch for the Evergreen State College.
I will. Yeah, I'm gonna look it up. I'm very interested. Actually, before we go on, so I might say our connection is fairly strong with the internet, but we might want to. What I'm going to try is that we close our video, and that might help to strengthen the connection. So I'm just going to click off video. Okay. Sometimes that frees up a little bandwidth, and if not, that's great. If not, whatever. So there should be a little button on your Skype that you can just press, and then we can keep going.
All right, I've done it.
There we go. That actually, I think that sounds a little bit better. So,
good.
Yeah. I think sometimes the video just clogs things up. All right. So at Evergreen State, it sounds like you managed to find your way into the senior year in philosophy. Yeah. So how did that then translate to doing graduate work in philosophy?
Right. Well, so I took this course on philosophy of mind, and it was called Computability in Cognition, and it was on philosophy of mind, logic, AI, number theory. But I remember we were reading a lot of at that time in the early 90s, the contemporary philosophy of mind. We were reading people like John Searle and Patricia Churchland and Dan Dennett on whether or not consciousness could be reduced to the brain, and each of them had a different point of view on this. But the question that kept popping up in my mind is, well, what does it mean to reduce one thing to another thing? In general, what is it for one scientific theory to be successfully reduced to another scientific theory? And it seemed to me that until we got really clear on what a scientific reduction is, we couldn't make a lot of headway or a lot of progress on the specific question whether consciousness can or cannot be reduced to the brain and what it even means to ask that question. So I found myself gradually getting pulled into the philosophy of science because I realized that it was the philosophers of science who were really tackling this question of what is a scientific reduction. What does it mean to reduce one thing to another thing? And they were looking at historical examples of reductions. So I think that experience really kind of helped to get me interested in the philosophy of science. And so when I eventually did apply to graduate school, I knew then I didn't have a very clear idea of what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to study the philosophy of science because I thought that studying the philosophy of science could help us make headway on some of these more traditional philosophical problems, like the mind-body problem.
Mm-hmm. So what is it? Yeah. So were you aware at the time? So people who do philosophy of science mention folks like Patricia Churchland and other people who are very engaged with the empirical work and doing this kind of empirically engaged work. But, at the time you could also go and do, empirically informed philosophy of mind, more focused on, more traditional philosophy of mind. But what was it about? What is it about philosophy of science that interests you, or you saw as perhaps maybe a better fit?
I mean, I think part of it's just a historical accident. Yep. I might have ended up in a program where, suppose I had ended up somewhere else and I met a great potential PhD advisor who said, "Hey, Justin, you ought to look into empirically informed philosophy of mind." And I might have gone that direction. But as it went, I ended up with a PhD advisor who was a philosopher of biology. And working with him, I came to find that the philosophy of biology was something that I really wanted to pursue, and that philosophy of biology could be my window onto these more general philosophical problems.
Okay.
What actually happened was when I got to graduate school, I was actually quite interested not only in philosophy of science but in philosophy of psychiatry and mental. And this whole question, of course, philosophers ask is, well, what is a mental illness? How do we decide which conditions qualify as mental illnesses and which ones are not mental illnesses? And one of the prominent viewpoints here is this notion called the harmful dysfunction analysis. And the idea is that in order for something to be a mental disorder, it has to stem from some kind of a dysfunction inside of you, maybe a dysfunction in your brain or a dysfunction in your mind.
Is this Wakefield?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Jerome Wakefield's view. And I actually recently had an opportunity to contribute to a volume called Jerome Wakefield and His Critics. It's going to be coming out hopefully in the next year or two. So it's fun to come back around full circle, the people that you read as a graduate student, and then you move on and you get a job and you get to criticize these people in print and engage with these people in more detail. So that's fun. But at the time when I read about his point of view, and I thought, well, that sounds really interesting, that mental disorders involve these inner dysfunctions. I guess now we just have to figure out what is it for a brain, what is it for somebody's brain to functioning well? And what is it for somebody's brain to function poorly? And how do we decide whose brain is functioning well and whose brain is functioning poorly? And I realized that, well, that took me directly to philosophy of biology. There are a number of philosophers of biology who for decades have been studying this problem of what are biological functions, what are dysfunctions, who gets to say what's functional and what's dysfunctional. And so my interest in psychiatry and mental illness, along with my advisor, who is a philosopher of biology, led to my taking up an interest in philosophy of biology. And then once you start studying biological functions, well, then you have to start thinking about natural selection. What is natural selection? What does natural selection explain, and what role does natural selection play in evolutionary change relative to other mechanisms of evolutionary change like genetic drift? And then you're off to the races.
Oh boy,
you're off in philosophy of biology. So that's what happened to me. But I'm very happy as a philosopher of biology, and I feel fortunate that I've been able to study these questions in the philosophy of biology, but to continue to pursue these more traditional questions having to do with human mind and mental illness and so on.
Yeah, I see. I'm interested to hear more about I'm looking at your historical book project related to mental illness, and so perhaps we could chat about that a little bit when we get to talk about the books. But just in my own curiosity, since I myself am in part of the philosophy of psychiatry crowd, I've studied, taken psychopathology courses, and we've discussed these harmful dysfunction accounts. And according to many clinicians and clinical psychologists, for the most part, the harmful dysfunction account seems to be somewhat problematic, but probably the best thing that's working for us so far. But I've taken on your I wanted to get your opinion, since you seem to be perhaps an expert in a number of these things, because this has been the criticism, is that adopting these concepts and ways of thinking from biology, and if you're going to do that, you need to get acquainted with the ways in which we, or what are functions, and when should we expect functions, and can we assume functions in certain things? Should we be asking questions? What is the function of this trait, or does this trait have a function? What kinds of questions? Right. And so, in terms of, do you have maybe some thoughts on just if we were to terms of defining mental illness, what do you think about the harmful dysfunction characterization? Is there anything better? Is there anything more nuanced we could go about thinking about? What do you think?
That's a great question. I don't accept the harmful dysfunction view. And the reason for that, and it's a point that a lot of people have been making for some time, is that I think if you look carefully at some of what we consider to be mental illnesses, it's hard to find any specific dysfunction underlying them. So if you take something like anxiety disorders, like generalized anxiety disorder, there are some clinicians who believe that generalized anxiety disorder may be an adaptation. It may be something like an adaptive response to an early prenatal environment or early postnatal environment. One idea is that people who are highly anxious tend to be more vigilant to potential threats in their environment. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not endorsing this adaptationist viewpoint, and I realize that adaptationist viewpoints are very controversial, but my point is that this is a plausible story. There's some empirical basis for it, and so if we admit that this is a plausible story, I don't think that we should accept Wakefield's view that mental disorders necessarily involve dysfunction. I think it's at least plausible, certainly empirically plausible, that some well-established mental disorders don't involve dysfunctions. Now, I'm kind of trying to evade the question that you asked me, which is a really hard question. Well, what's better? What's a better construed mental illness? I have no idea, and I have a chapter in my book, the book that's going to be coming out in January. I think it's the chapter 11, and I talk about Wakefield, and I talk about my problem with Wakefield. I developed my own version of this challenge to Wakefield's view, and I admit at the end, just as you said, Wakefield's view might be the best thing we have
it's
going.
Like the lesser of several evils, the lesser of, it's sort of what else? Yeah, what else could it be? And I don't know if that's I don't know if that's always the best reason to accept a view, but
I don't think it's a good reason. It's sometimes, I think Elliot Sober calls this the only game in town argument, where my view is the only game in town, so it's got to be right. And clearly that's not right. We can admit that it is. It may be, as far as I know, the best thing that we have going, but maybe the better alternative is just to say, well, man, I guess we have no idea what the hell mental disorders are. Yeah. I mean, that's another way of going. It's just saying, well, we don't know yet, and boy, hope somebody figures it out soon. Yeah, that's. I know it's a lame response. I know you. No. This is exciting.
I appreciate that further clarification. I think. Well, I was kind of under the condition, under the interpretation that there's this old review paper that kind of breaks down about 5 or 6 main points, and there's problems with the harmful dysfunction, but the conclusion was, well, it works for the most part, or well, that's kind of what we're working with, and it's often what a lot of clinicians and clinical neuroscientists are working on. They'll cite Wakefield, or they'll describe things in terms of dysfunctions or harm, because it captures both an I guess the idea is that it captures potentially an etiological point or an account that we can find some kind of dysfunction or cause of reason, but then also define basically combine the fact value distinction. We can combine the
I love that. I love that about his view, and that's one of the motives behind it. We want to say, well, when we decide that a certain condition, say alcoholism, is a mental disorder, first, there are some biological facts. There's underlying factual judgments that we're making, and we're making a value judgment that it's harmful. And I do admire the way that he tries to pull together. Look, when our mental disorder classification is based both on facts and on values. I like that part. I guess my main concern with the emphasis on dysfunction is that it potentially blinds researchers to ways that mental illnesses or certain aspects of mental illnesses might be functional or might be adaptive or might be serving some kind of a purpose that we don't entirely understand. So another example of this, there's some researchers who look at schizophrenia and particularly so-called positive symptoms of hallucinations and delusions. And one idea that's been floating around is this idea that perhaps it's like this. Perhaps some subtypes of schizophrenia stem from some kind of an underlying dysfunction that gives rise to these abnormal perceptual experiences. So there is a dysfunction, but then perhaps the delusions come about as the person's best attempt to make sense of what's going on in their perceptual experience. And so if that's right, even if the hallucinations or the abnormal perceptual experiences might involve some kind of a dysfunction, the delusions, that's actually serving a purpose that has a functional adaptive role. It may actually be helping some of these individuals navigate their experience and kind of make sense of their experience. And so the reason I don't like the Wakefield's approach is that I think when we use the dysfunction label, I worry that we're blinded to, again, either an entire mental illness like a generalized anxiety disorder or even a component of a mental illness like the delusions of some kinds of schizophrenia. I worry that it blinds us to the way those might be useful to us, maybe misguiding our research or misguiding our therapies. Because if their theory of delusion is right, then you think, well, if you're treating somebody who has this kind of schizophrenia, you don't necessarily want to go after the delusions as if that's the main problem this person is having. You want to go after the perceptual experiences. The delusions, you want to leave those alone because they're actually doing some good here.
Right, yeah. The underlying theory or what we're working with can lead to a misplaced focus, is what I'm hearing, or a missed focus on, underappreciation of certain qualities of experience. Yeah.
That's right. That's the concern.
Cool. So
I do with his view, and I admire a lot about his view.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to this criticism, this work that's coming out. Well, thank you for going on that the tangent back to not necessarily a tangent, but into the philosophy of psychiatry. So I know a lot of your work though has been centered more generally and specifically in philosophy of biology. And so is that the kind of work that that you really came out of your PhD program?
So even though the dissertation was mainly about, the bigger point of the dissertation was to talk about mental illness, but a lot of it was about biological dysfunctions and biological functions. And as I said, that's what I've been mainly writing about for the last 10 years or so. Okay. But one of the reasons I got so interested in biological functions was because I've made my way into functions from the philosophy of psychiatry. But then I realized that the biological functions debate feeds into so many interesting debates that scientists are having and that philosophers are having. So I found that there was just so much to write about. Not only writing about what are biological functions and what are dysfunctions, but the biological functions debate plays into debates in philosophy of mind about the nature of meaning and telesemantics. Some people think that mental representation should be understood in terms of biological functions, and I found that I had things to contribute to that debate. And of course, as we've been talking about, it plays very heavily into debates in the philosophy of medicine and the philosophy of psychiatry about the nature of disease. I think it plays into debates about mechanism and mechanistic explanation. And then a few years ago, a funny thing happened. A group of geneticists started having this very major debate with one another about what proportion of the human genome is functional. And there's one side of the debate. Back in about 2012, there was a bunch of papers published by a group called ENCODE, and the ENCODE people were arguing that about 8% of the human genome is functional. And then you had some other biologists, the junk DNA theorists, or the traditional junk DNA theorists, and they were arguing that at most 10% of the human genome, 5 to 15% of the human genome is functional, and the rest of it's just junk DNA. And one of the junk DNA theorists, his name is Ford Doolittle, and I just had a chance to meet him very recently. He started arguing that the only way you could claim that 80% of the human genome is functional is if you're just conflating very different notions of biological function. And he started citing the philosophers of biology. He even cited my own work. And he said, look, the philosophers of biology all agree that you ENCODE people are using the notion of function in a totally incoherent way. And so it was really exciting to see my work getting drawn into this debate between geneticists about the nature of genome functions. And it was funny because everybody, all the geneticists working on it, even Doolittle's opponents, agree that the debate in many ways does come down to what exactly we mean by biological function and how exactly should we assess whether a stretch of DNA is functional or not functional. About 3 weeks ago, I was actually at a conference that Ford Doolittle and a philosopher, Stefan Lindquist, organized up in Halifax. It was really cool. It brought together about 6 philosophers of science and about 6 geneticists to really hash through this issue about what are biological functions, what are genome functions, how do we figure out what proportion of the human genome is functional. So it was a really fun and interesting way to bring the biological functions debate to bear on a very lively debate that geneticists are having with one another. So the biological functions topic has kind of led me into some very interesting and I guess surprising new lines of research.
That's great. Did you attend this conference? Did you take part in this or the Halifax workshop?
Yeah, I did. I gave a talk there. So I spent the summer. This is what I did all summer. I studied transposable elements, and these are segments of DNA that can move about from place to place on the genome. And a lot of the biologists here were interested in studying the dynamics of these transposable elements. And some of them treat these transposable elements, they refer to them as bits of selfish DNA. They don't do anything for the organism. They might even hurt our fitness a little bit. But they think of transposable elements as kind of having their own evolutionary agendas, if you'll allow the metaphor. And so I spent the summer studying transposable elements so that I could say something intelligent to this group of philosophers and geneticists who knew way more about the subject than I did. So yeah, it was fun. And again, that wasn't a year ago, if you'd asked me what I thought I would be doing this summer,
Yeah.
I definitely would have said, oh, I'm going to be buckling down, reading everything I can get my hands on transposable elements so that I can talk to these geneticists about how to think about their functions. But it was fun, and it opened up some new research for me, and it's going to lead to some new papers that are going to be coming out pretty soon. And the greatest thing about it is that it's contributing to a live debate. It's contributing to a real fight that are having with one another. Could potentially, for philosophers of science to really be able to weigh into these live debates between scientists is a really fun. It's fun, and it kind of it helps us. I think it helps me to see that our work really does have this a bigger impact on science than I think we sometimes don't appreciate. That our work does have a real impact on science.
Yeah. Would you mind referring? What was the name of the conference or the workshop?
I have to look it up.
Okay. Yeah. No problem. Maybe we can do it after. I'm just I'm really curious. I've just never. It's just really cool to hear about.
Yeah, it was something like transpose. Oh man, Stefan and Ford are going to kill me for this. But it was something like transposable elements, the science and the philosophy, and it was at Halifax in late October. And we're talking about putting together some kind of maybe a special issue of a philosophy journal devoted to papers on the topic. So we'll definitely. There's going to be more coming out pretty soon on this area. But yeah, I think that was it.
Okay. No, yeah, I'm just going to look. I just find this fascinating. And the fact of that almost an even display of both philosophers of science and scientists, I think is really, really worthwhile and really interesting. Yeah. So no, I'll have to follow up with you about this. This is fascinating to me. Well, so in the interest of time, actually, why don't we chat a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your new book that will be coming out.
Right. Thank you. I just finished this book, What Biological Functions Are and Why They Matter. It's coming out with Cambridge in January or February. And it was really fun to write. So I'll give you just the short version. A couple of years ago, I wrote a short book called A Critical Overview of Biological Functions. And the point of that was just to give it was a short textbook in a survey of here's what everybody has had to say about biological functions for the last 80 years or so. So I just wrote it to be an up-to-date textbook on the biological functions debate. And so when I started writing this new book, it was a blast because I didn't have to talk about anybody else's view except my own. I could say, if you want to know about the causal role theory or Christopher Bors's biostatistical theory, read this other book. This new book with Cambridge, you're not going to read a whole lot about other people's theories. I just get to develop my own theory, try to convince you that my theory of biological function is right. And then I spend a lot of time developing the implications of my view of biological function for these diverse areas, for thinking about the nature of mental representation, for thinking about the nature of mental illness, for thinking about mechanisms and mechanistic explanation, and a little bit about thinking about this issue in genetics about genome function. So one of the goals of the book, in addition to trying to convince people that I'm right, is to really show the significance of the biological functions debate to a lot of different areas in philosophy of mind, philosophy of medicine, philosophy of biology, and even biology itself. So it was very fun to write, and it was kind of nice not to have to spend a lot of time kind of rehashing other people's point of view. I just got to give the strongest case I could for my own view without having to try to trash everybody else's opinion on the matter.
Right. So yeah, you review the generalized selected effects theory, which seamlessly integrates Evo-Devo on functions.
That's right.
I'm interested to hear. Okay.
Well, let me give you the 30-second version. I can do this in 30 seconds. But so the selected effects theory, of course, says that the function of a trait is whatever it's been selected for, by natural selection or some comparable kind of selection process. But a lot of philosophers of biology have interpreted that to mean that in order for a trait to have a function, it has to have been selected for by natural selection, specifically operating over an evolutionary time scale. However, there have been plenty of theorists like Ruth Millikan, for example, or Paul Griffiths or others who have pointed out that selection can be a much more general process. It could refer to things like trial and error learning. And so there's no reason that a selected effects theorist has to limit functions to traits that evolved over an evolutionary timescale by natural selection. There are other kinds of selection processes that take place over the lifetime of the individual, and that can give rise to new functions too. But I think the way that people like Millikan and Griffith were going about doing it was mistaken, and it was mistaken in a way that really handicapped this what I call the generalized selected effects theory of function. So I take the core idea, I show how to do it right, and then I show how it leads to a lot of I think, interesting innovations, not only in the functions debate, but in corresponding literature and philosophy of psychiatry, philosophy of mind, philosophy of medicine, and so on.
Oh, this sounds super interesting. This sounds like a great model have you thought about teaching a course on biological functions, or is this something you do at Hunter?
I don't know if we could get the enrollment to do a course on biological functions. But I am going to be teaching a course at the CUNY's Graduate Center in the spring. I'll do a philosophy of biology course. So I certainly hope that the students want to hear about biological functions, and if so, maybe we'll do a few weeks on that topic.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate you giving the pitch. And when can we can expect it out next year? Or is it
January, February? Yes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, January. February should be out. You can already it's the pre-order stuff is on Amazon, so you can bookmark it. You don't have to buy it, but just so you remember, it's up. It's the information's up there online, and hopefully another year or two, a couple years from now, I'll have a book where I finally explain what mental illnesses really are. That's my next big project. But
this book, Madness and as to Function and as Strategy, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Okay. So I'm really, so that will be good. So you said in a year or two we'll have some work on that potentially, and that will be more. Is that like an HPS project, or is that more like a history of science project?
It's going to be. Well, I'm going on sabbatical next year, so I can really just focus on writing this book about mental illness. Yeah, my provisional title: Madness as Dysfunction and as Strategy, and I want to show how there have been these two main perspectives in psychiatry that I think have coexisted, and you could go back even 300 years, and you see these two perspectives. One is that mental illnesses generally stem from some kind of a dysfunction in the mind or in the brain, and another which sees mental disorders as having some kind of an adaptive or functional quality. And I think that this is not a recent debate. I think it's been going on for centuries. And so one of my projects here is to kind of rewrite the history of psychiatry through the lens of this debate between these two perspectives, which I'm calling madness as dysfunction and madness as strategy, and then draw out some implications for some of the more contemporary discussions in, for example, Wakefield's view of mental illness and some of the more contemporary philosophical problems. So it's very much going to merge history of science.
Fantastic. Well, I very much looking forward to this book. Please let me know when please let me know when you make some headway on it. I'll certainly follow up with you about it. Well, let's conclude with the question we've been asking our guests. What do you take to be the greatest challenge facing philosophy of science today?
That's a great question, and I'm kind of embarrassed because I know that you know way more about this topic than I do. I mean, you've been writing on this topic, so I really don't have anything very terrific to say about it, except just my own observations.
That's all we're looking for.
As you know, as everybody knows, the job market has been pretty brutal for us philosophers of science, for us philosophers of biology, at least since about 2010, or maybe before that. And so I think part of this question of, whether philosophers of science, I think you put it this way: does philosophy of science need to have more science in it, or does it need to have more philosophy in it? And I think, for better or for worse, that's a question that's partly going to be dictated by the law of supply and demand. What do we need to do to sell ourselves in a very tight job market?
Yeah.
I would think, offhand, without having the relevant expertise, that in order for philosophers of science and philosophers of biology, in order for us to sell ourselves in a rough job market, we've got to convince people that this stuff is really interesting, that it pertains to traditional philosophical problems of the mind or of human nature, of metaphysics or epistemology. And so my sense now is, given the reality of the job market, that we've got to sell ourselves again to philosophers at large and show why the work that we're doing really does fill a significant gap in traditional philosophical problems, metaphysics, epistemology, philosophy of mind, even ethics. I think we've got to appeal to our colleagues who are doing these more traditional philosophical pursuits. And maybe 20 years from now, that'll be different. Maybe 20 years from now, philosophy of science will be so hot that we'll just be able to focus more on the science, focus more on engaging with the scientists. But my sense is that we gotta sell ourselves a little bit to our colleagues.
Well, perhaps your book could be a starting point for that, given that some of in terms of the way in which you develop some of your implications of your particular view of function and its implications for mental representation, philosophy of mind, let's see, it just more contemporary debates in these other more general philosophy of science areas. I don't know.
I certainly hope so. That was one of my goals, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Justin. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you and getting to know a little bit more about your work and what you're up to. It seems like, this is some really important, really frontline stuff that you've got going on. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or say before we go?
No, that's it. I think we've covered everything. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
It was a pleasure talking with you. Well, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay, good. Thanks so much, Nick.
All right, take care, Justin. Bye.